What's up everyone, Master Fox here today, and I want to talk to you guys about the results from YCS Bochum because these results are actually really interesting. So first, let's take a look at the day one breakdown. So the biggest group is actually the other unknown group, which is just kind of any random deck that's not named here. So it could be any rogue deck ranging from Chainburn to Exodia or anything like that. So they make up the biggest group, and then the biggest group of a single deck is actually Nekroz. And this is to be expected. Nekroz are basically the best deck of the format, so it makes sense that they're the most represented deck. And then they're followed by Shaddoll and Satellar Knights, which are represented in relatively equal amounts. And then you see Burning Abyss and Cliffworth next, followed by the kind of tier 2-ish decks, which is Elemental Heroes, Volcanics, Spirit Beast, and Yosenju. So even from the day one breakdown, it's a pretty diverse set of duelists coming in with different decks. But what really matters is what decks can make it to day two, because a lot of these decks will eventually be flushed out in the early rounds. So what's most important is the ratio of the decks that make it through. So looking at the day two deck breakdown, we see that about half of the Nekroz decks make it through, whereas only about a third of the Shaddoll and Satellar Knight decks make it through. So we know that comparing the ratios of these decks, Nekroz has the edge because about half of their slots made it through from day one to day two, whereas only a third of Shaddoll and Satellar Knights make it through. And for Cliffworth and Burning Abyss, they have even lower ratios of decks that make it through from day one to day two. And then all the other rogues, a lot of them were essentially eliminated. We have some others, so we don't really know exactly what's here, but Infernoids and Yosenju are represented on their own. Moving on to the top 32, though, is where things get really interesting. So looking at the top 32, we see that there is a majority of Nekroz decks. There's 21 Nekroz decks, followed by 5 Shaddolls, 2 Satellar Knights, 2 Cliffworths, 1 Volcanic, and 1 Mecha Phantom Beast. So first I want to take a look at this Mecha Phantom Beast result. There was a single duelist who made it through with Mecha Phantom Beast. The Mecha Phantom Beast player actually went 7-1 on day 1 going into day 2, which is really impressive. And he had a feature match where he OTK'd a Nekroz player actually. So you can see that on the Konami Twitch site. They actually had it recorded on the feature match, so you can see him and his OTK combo, which is really cool. So what else do I want to say about this top 32? What's interesting is actually there's 6 kind of deck slots, and they make up the 6 attributes of the game. So you have Nekroz as water, Shaddoll as dark, Satellar Knights are light, Cliffworth is earth, Volcanic is fire, and Mecha Phantom Beast is wind. So that's kind of cool that you have all the attributes kind of represented in the top 32. Even though Nekroz is taking around like 67%, because it's around like 2/3 of the top 32. But it's still interesting that we see decks that we wouldn't expect. Like Mecha Phantom Beast, I would never expect them to make the top 32 at all. But they made it through, and the build is actually very interesting. It's obviously maining heavy anti-Nekroz stuff, but still very impressive. And then we can see that the high amount of Shaddolls show that they were really improved by the addition of Star Seraphs, because as I know, most of these Shaddoll decks were the Star Seraph builds. And then Satellar Knights were actually worse off, it seems, than they were before, because Shaddolls took a bigger jump with the Star Seraphs than the Satellar Knights did, which is an interesting point to note. Cliffworths kind of remained where they were before. They're relevant enough to get a couple of tops, but not really move up that much. And this was expected because they didn't really gain anything from World Superstars. And this Volcanic deck, as I know it, this is not just a normal Volcanic deck, but this was actually a Volcanic Hero deck that used Summoner Monk along with Shadow Mist just to go into Dark Law. And if you think about this, this is actually devastating, because if you have a Dark Law on board and then you use Scattershot's effect, it's essentially a Raigeki that will banish everything that's destroyed, so that they won't get to recover if you're playing against like a Shaddoll or Burning Abyss deck. Even Satellar Knights would have really hard time responding to all their monsters essentially being banished. So this is a really cool deck, and I want to eventually see the deck profile for this, because it's a really interesting concept combining heroes with volcanics, because both aren't decks that you would think would combine with each other, but just using the engines together you get a lot of pluses, because volcanics plus a lot off Blaze Accelerator, and you can plus a lot off of Shadow Mist getting the mass changes as well. And Dark Law is just Dark Law shutting down basically all the decks in the meta. He's good against everything. And of course, Scatter Shot is really good in almost all the matchups too. So these two decks making it into the top 232 is super interesting for me. Seeing Volcanics and Mecha Phantom be two decks that I would never expect at all is just awesome to see here. The rest of the decks were pretty much normal and expected. Nekroz, Shaddoll, Satellar Knights, Clifforts. The only one missing is Burning Abyss, which is rather interesting. These are my thoughts about the top 32 results at YCS Bochum. I'm really, I guess, happy about these results because they show that the game is not as stagnant as some people would like to believe. So that's it for this video. Please leave a comment in the description below telling me your thoughts about these YCS results. Leave this video a like if you enjoyed it. And that is it. I will see you guys in my next video. Thank you.